Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar looking at safer drivers, tools for improving safety and efficiency. I'm Caroline Perry from Break, the road safety charity. Firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to the sponsors of today's event, SmarTrack. We wouldn't be able to run our webinars and other events without the support of corporate partners like them. And if you're new to Break, we're a road safety charity working to prevent road deaths and injuries, make communities safer, and support people bereaved and injured in crashes through a range of initiatives, including our events, awards, and resources for fleet professionals. We also run initiatives such as Road Safety Week in New Zealand, Beep Beep Days for young children, and provide free support resources to people bereaved in crashes. And at the end of the webinar, I'll mention a couple of forthcoming initiatives that we have. So fleet safety is a core part of our work. Our fleet safety activities include webinars like this, seminars, and our annual Australasian Fleet Champions Awards programme. And we also provide resources sharing best practice information. So safer drivers is one of the pillars of the Safe System approach to road safety, and also key to our fleet safety work. At work drivers tend to drive more often for longer and further distances than the average driver. And there are many employees, contractors, and even volunteers who are at work drivers, but who may not realise it because it's not their primary role. So driving might be their means of getting to client visits, to sales meetings, or to work sites, but it's not what they spend most of their day doing. So our fleet safety initiatives cover not only professional drivers, but also anyone who drives as part of their role, and those who supervise and manage them too. So moving on to the first of today's speakers, I'm delighted to introduce Aaron Wallace, Business Development Manager at SmarTrack. And SmarTrack is a leading Australasian provider of fleet management, telematics, and safety solutions, helping organisations to keep their people safe while improving fleet performance. So SmarTrack works mostly with government, healthcare, utilities, and community organisations to provide solutions which include GPS and telematics, driver safety monitoring, lone worker protection, both on person and in vehicle safety devices, compliance reporting, and shared vehicle management, so pool cars. So we're delighted to have you with us today, Aaron. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. Let me just bring this up. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Caroline, and thank you to Break for having me along today. Hi, everyone. My name's Aaron Wallace. I'm from SmarTrack. And look, over the next 15 minutes, I want to walk you through two topics that matter to any organisation where people drive for work. The first is how driver behaviour affects safety, fuel, cost and maintenance. The second is what your legal obligations look like under the New Zealand Health and Safety at Work Act when those people are on the road on your behalf. Now, I understand that there are quite a few people from Australia here, so look, although I'm specifically looking at New Zealand, there is some correlations that you can take from this presentation, and we do have an Australian team that I would ask you to reach out to for specific duty of care stuff there as well. And one more quick note before I begin, I'll use healthcare and community services as my worked examples because that's where I see plenty of risk occur. However, these principles can apply to any fleet, whether you're running courier vans, trade utes, sales teams, or school transport. This hopefully should all resonate. So let's jump in. Okay, now driving is one of the riskiest tasks most of your workers undertake on a regular basis. And most of these behaviours we're about to look at are also safety risks. For example, aggressive driving doesn't just burn fuel, it crashes vehicles, injuries, exposes your organisation legally. So when the slide says the hidden cost of driver behaviour, I'm really talking about a hidden risk, one that shows up on the balance sheet as fuel and maintenance, but it also shows up in real life as incidents and injuries. Now, fuel is between 25 and 40% of total fleet costs. I did this before the actual change in pricing, so I can imagine it's slightly higher now. But most of the effort to control that goes into shopping around for fuel cards, the right vehicle and servicing. Now, these are all important, but they're addressing the known factors. The biggest controllable variable for both cost and for safety sits behind the steering wheel. And look at the numbers on the slide. Aggressive drivers burn up to 20% more fuel than standard drivers. Maintenance costs run up to 25% higher when driving behavior is poor. And one in five vehicles is involved in some form of crash or collision each year. Now, these aren't fuel price problems, they're behavior problems. And behavior is addressable if you can see it and train for it. So the first risks we are looking at is harsh braking and rapid acceleration. Two behaviors, and together they are the single most expensive way to operate a vehicle. Harsh braking wastes the kinetic energy you already burned fuel to create. Every aggressive stop is fuel paid for and thrown away. Rapid acceleration is the other side of that coin. Flooring the throttle forces the engine to work much harder to overcome inertia, and that's where that immediate fuel burn happens. So put together, an aggressive driver uses about 15 to 20% more fuel than a standard driver, and that's on average. In a city where there's more stopping and starting, and the spread between the most aggressive driver and the most efficient driver can be as high as 30%. And there's a safety angle to that worth naming as well. Harsh braking events aren't just fuel economy, they're often a signal of a near miss. So every time a driver slams the brake, something nearly happened. And it might just be that they slammed the brake because they didn't see the light changing, or it might be someone across the road that they didn't see. But the harsh brake count gives you visibility into risk, not just inefficiency. On maintenance, good driving behavior cut costs by up to 25%. And that's across brake pads, rotors, tires, drivetrains. They all wear faster under aggressive driving. So one pattern hits safety, fuel and cost, and maintenance at once. And drivers who have been through eco drive or defensive training can save up to 30% on fuel versus a conventional driver. That is one of the highest leverage behavioral interventions there is. So the third risk here is overspeeding, and look, we know about it, but it's the stats I find revealing. For example, driving at a steady 90 kilometers an hour instead of 110 gives you up to 25% fuel reduction. Look, and that's the theoretical ceiling. But what you'd measure under controlled conditions, holding speed consistent on a flat road. On long New Zealand routes, imagine this is probably the same in Australia as well. The Transport Agency here confirmed a 5 to 7% saving just from reducing the maximum speed by 10 kilometres an hour. So one is the ceiling and the other is NZTA shows what fleets typically see. Either way, slowing down saves fuel. And if you add along with cruise control, if used consistently, will save about 5% on its own because it stops that gradual creep, right, over their limit drivers don't even realize they are doing. Now, this brings me to that third point of the slide. Everyone drives a little over the limit. I imagine most fleet managers have heard this before. It saves time, right? Well, how much time does it save? If we look on a 100-kilometer stretch, driving at 110 as opposed to 100-kilometer, it saves you 5 minutes. 5 minutes with a potential meaningful fuel penalty, faster wear on your tires and brakes, and a higher crash risk if anything goes wrong. Just 5 minutes. With the numbers and the context, this is where we can help shift the conversation with drivers. So idling. Lastly, we'll look at idling, and if you stop idling just for 10 seconds, idling for 10 seconds wastes more fuel than switching the engine off and restarting it. A standard vehicle burns 0.8 to 1.5 litres an hour while sitting still and going nowhere. If I use healthcare and community services, where does this happen? Again, that's staff waiting at client sites, the gap between appointments, phone calls in the vehicle, hopefully pulled over, drop-offs and pickups. None of it feels a waste in the moment, but if you multiply that across every vehicle, every day, every week, every month, it's a meaningful line item. The good news is this is highly visible with the moment you start measuring it. Again, visibility with the right training is where behaviors change. So let me show you what it looks like when fleets turn it on. This is a New Zealand Regional Council we work with. over 130 vehicles, 5 officers, more than 21,000 square kilometres of serviceable area, urban centres, remote rural areas, staff crossing in and out of cellular coverage. Before they had fleet visibility, the challenge was invisible itself. They couldn't see where the vehicles were, how they were being driven, or whether drivers had finished their day safely. When they implemented the right dashboards, the right reporting, something surprising emerged. One, the fleet was averaging 10,000 kilometres per workday, and the speed data showed a volume of overspeeding events that no one had known about. The data enabled real conversations between managers and drivers, and not disciplinary ones, data-driven ones. Here's what happened, and here's what we would like to see instead. The organisation now uses filtered reports to spot trends early rather than reacting to incidents. That's the pattern we often see. Visibility isn't surveillance, it's having the right conversations with the right evidence at the right time. So look, this is not rocket science, but here are 5 practical actions you can start today. 1, identify and reduce idling. Use your reporting to see where it's happening, when and for how long. Modest reductions compound. Every hour of idle time you remove is a litre of fuel you don't buy. 2, improve driver behaviour through data, monitoring speeds, harsh braking, acceleration. These are data for use the data for constructive feedback. Driver safety scores, not discipline. 3, eliminate unnecessary trips, underutilized vehicles, trips that should be shared, right sizing, backed by evidence rather than guesswork. 4, this is for those that have a pooled fleet. Use your pool effectively. Use those vehicles effectively. Coordinate shared trips. Present fuel-efficient vehicles at first booking. You can think outside the square and offer e-bikes for short local trips. And 5, and I think this is a big one for me, invest in driver training. Structured programs like eco-drive, defensive driving, fatigue awareness can cut fuel up to 30%, as mentioned earlier, and improve safety outcomes. What I'd add is this. Training works best when it's paired with data, so drivers can actually see their before and after. Training alone tells someone to drive differently. Training plus data shows them that they are. That combination is what changes habits again. Now, look, that's the cost and safety side handled, but costs are one thing. There's a legal dimension behind all of this as well, and here's where your duty of care comes in. So, duty of care in the fleet context is your organisation's legal and moral obligation to take all reasonably practicable steps to protect anyone who drives for work on your behalf, and anyone affected by that driving as well. And there's an interesting part, that duty extends further than you'd think. When a vehicle is used in company business, that vehicle is legally a workplace. The duty doesn't depend on who owns the vehicle, so that includes grey fleet as well. Driver behaviour itself is a hazard under the law, and the duty covers the whole picture, maintenance, planning, response. Each of those is a way that duty reaches further than I think common sense expects. So all of this sits under your PCBU responsibilities, which brings us to what PCBU actually means. Okay, the Health and Safety at Work Act turns all of that into legal duty. If you're a person conducting a business or undertaking a PCBU, which is essentially every organisation, you have 5 primary duties, so far as reasonably practicable. Health and safety of your workers, others not put at risk, information training and supervision, making sure you're monitoring those conditions, and adequate facilities. Now, reasonably practicable does a lot of work here. You weigh the likelihood of risk, the severity of harm, what a reasonable person would do, and the cost of controls. I guess the line to remember here is cost cannot be used as an excuse if the risk is serious. Serious risk demands serious controls, proportionate to the risk, not the budget. When a fleet incident becomes a workplace health and safety prosecution, the liability isn't just organisational, it's personal and it's criminal. So HISWA distributes that liability across 3 formal levels. So if you look to the right column of the slide, the workers piece, that's termed for anyone carrying out work for a PCBU, including your drivers, and they can face a $300,000 fine and 5 years imprisonment if they fail to take reasonable care. Now, the middle column, officers, this is HISWA's term for anyone with significant influence over the business. And that's typically your directors or your chief executive, for example. But the definition can extend further dependent on the business and how it's structured. Officers must exercise due diligence. If not, there's a $600,000 maximum fine, up to 5 years imprisonment. That's your personal liability. Your company insurance doesn't cover that. Your indemnity won't help you either. So if you sit at that level anywhere in your organization, that exposure sits with you, not the company. And the company itself, the PCBU, carries the primary duty up to $3 million for reckless conduct. And that cannot be insured and it cannot be contracted out. It cannot be contracted out of. One thing to be clear on, and again, I think this is probably the most important part on this slide, the prosecution is a criminal offence, not civil, not regulatory, criminal. That's why your duty of care is real, because in New Zealand, when this goes wrong, real people face real prison time. And that's where the next slide comes in. Here we look at what wrong actually looks like. These are real WorkSafe prosecutions. First, we have a brake failure resulting in a 150K fine plus an 85K reparation. In 2014, multiple handbrakes across different businesses and a faulty lifting mechanism, all resulting in fines, but far worse, fatalities. Now note, the 2014 cases sit under the predecessor act. Under the current framework, maximum penalties are actually materially higher. But if we put, and this is hard to do, if we put the fines and the resulting fatalities to the side, the ripple effect is huge. Missed appointments, disrupted care, vulnerable people without support, reputation damage, WorkSafe investigation. So the fine is the headline, but the ripple is the reality piece. So let's look at how, again, I'm going to use healthcare here as well as an example. In this sector, duty of care extends in 4 directions at once, and the principles apply elsewhere, but just less visibly. Duty to the worker, for example, solo staff, unfamiliar routes, cellular blackouts. HISWA expects a reliable system to know they've arrived and returned. A personal phone isn't a control. Duty to the client, when a visit doesn't happen, a vulnerable person can be harmed. Duty of care extends to the people being driven to, not just the drivers. Duty to what's carried. And that's things like, again, with healthcare, medication, patient records, medical equipment. The vehicle is a mobile extension of your clinical environment. The duty extends to the schedule as well. So if appointments can't be met safely, that creates temptation to speed or skip pre-trip checks, for example. HISWA expects you to design that pressure out of the system and not rely on workers resisting it. So if we look at the scenario on the right, nurse running 20 minutes behind on a rural road, meeting an elderly patient waiting for medication, speeds, then loses control with no coverage. No one knows where she is. 4 duties failing at once. So for non-healthcare audiences, the pattern is the same. Worker, recipient, cargo, schedule. If you're running a courier fleet or a construction crew, substitute your own nouns, but the 4 directions still apply. And finally, 5 actions that map directly to your 4 duties. Know your people are safe, lone worker visibility with satellite, fall over for black spots or not a personal phone. Log the visit, not the trip, not just the trip, sorry. Know when a client visit was missed, not just where the vehicle went. Secure the vehicle carriers, asset tracking for medication records, equipment, etc. Schedule against capacity, not optimism. Use trip data to set workloads that can actually be met safely. And keep vehicles roadworthy with automated maintenance. Look at prosecution table on the previous slide. You know, every single one of those cases was a maintenance failure. So visibility isn't a nice to have, it's how you meet your duty. So yeah, look, that's 5 things I'd encourage you to take back into your fleet. And look, I'm not going to pretend any of this is simple. Fleet management is hard, and balancing cost, safety, and legal obligations all at once is harder. So, but the data we've covered today at least shows that the same actions tend to deliver across all 3. You know, you reduce harsh driving and you save fuel, save maintenance, reduce risk, improve visibility. You end up supporting your drivers, protecting your organization, and you meet your duty of care. So you don't need to fix everything at once, just start with what's most visible to you right now. And thank you everyone for your time. That's me done.
That's great. Thanks so much, Aaron. Really appreciate your time on that and some good tips in there. And certainly that I've also seen at least one question come through already, which is great to see. So if you have got questions specific to Aaron's presentation or more generally around the topic, then please put those through with the Q&A, and we'll address those at the end when we get to that point. So moving straight along to our next speaker. Our next speaker today is Richard Rayner. He's the Chief Executive of Fleet Coach. So Richard brings his background in technology, law and commerce to bear on road safety. Having led various initiatives in Europe and the Middle East, he's returned home to NZ and is now leading the Fleet Coach team as they bring driver behaviour change to New Zealand and Australian roads. So great to have you with us today, Richard. Thanks.
Hi everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks, Caroline. But before I get into it, can I just maybe do a quick commercial for Brake? The work they do in the community, supporting people who have suffered from crashes and trying to just bring that number down is outstanding. And before I get into my stuff, I just wanted to say that if people are able to engage with Brake, or even better support them, please do that, because it makes a palpable difference. So go Brake. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate it.
That's all right. It's well deserved. My slides here. Good as gold. Okay. So this is a little bit kind of wooden, maybe, because I can't see you or we can't speak to each other. But what I want to do is ask a few rhetorical questions as we go through, in the hope that it just gives you maybe time to pause and think and defocus on listening to my voice and just reflect. So we're going to be talking, no surprise, about contributing factors to light vehicle crashes and how we reduce the risk. We'll be talking about good old policy, driver psychology, and how do we engage staff and volunteers in our teams. And then, because it can all get a bit grim and a bit difficult, just some examples of real world success to give us some hope and some inspiration that these outcomes, these changes are possible, and they are being done and they have been done. Cool. So, risk. We're talking about risk today. Risk is all about controls. And if we're thinking about vehicle risk, then there's two, or driving risk, there's two sorts of controls we have. One is policy, and the other is the person. Other factors like other drivers and the weather, etc., we have very little control over. So I want to start off by talking about policy, just to kind of deal with it properly, and then move on from that, because I don't want to focus too much on policy today. Any policy in an organisation, it performs kind of one or two functions typically. So if you have a very large team and you want everyone to be doing the same thing, then you put a policy in there and it knits everyone together. Another use is if you don't have access to high skilled staff in a particular area, but you want them to do a job to a certain quality level, then you put policy in place and they become almost like work instructions. And in the space of road safety, policy and driver policy and fleet policy is largely there to protect the organisation. And what it does is it provides constraints on the activity of driving that says things like, you cannot speed, you must check the vehicle is well maintained, you must obey the road rules, etc., etc. And it's good. Policy really has its place, but it bumps up against the real world from time to time. Like any law, it'll tell you when you're doing something wrong, but it won't encourage you or necessarily generate the right behaviours to do the right thing. So if you're running late between sites, and you think, right, I've got a choice now, I can either speed or I can not speed and get in trouble when I get there. What do you do? Because the policy says don't speed, and yet the people you'll sit in the room with will give you a frown if you turn up late. So good policy is written loose enough that it allows for flexibility. So rather than just being punitive, it should include things like it's always okay before you start driving to quickly phone your destination and say, look, I'm going to be a quarter of an hour late. It's raining, or my last appointment overran. So I'd encourage people to build some flexibility into their policy and see it as a way just to breathe a bit of life and put a bit of air into the driving practice. Anything we write in policy or rules, and this is just a human experience, has unintended consequences. So we might put something in like on the example here, we allow for a 10% tolerance for overtaking, which kind of seems reasonable. So if you're in a 50k zone, the company will allow you to go to 55 to overtake. But that act of going a bit faster increases your risk and the impact that risk has should you crash. Mobile phones is one of my favorite ones. People say mobile phones with hands-free is okay for use, but because you're actually thinking about something other than driving, research shows that it increases your crash risk by 4 times. And I know I was talking to a large oil producer that will remain nameless, and they have a policy, and they say if anyone picks up a phone or uses their phone while they're driving anywhere in the world, they're a global organization, then there's serious measures taken, and that applies right from the person who's watering the plants right up to the senior management. So some organizations are now just saying some things just aren't acceptable, and will take the impacts of not being able to do that thing over the increased risk. Fatigue management is a subtle one. Often practices, like I said, they're 15-minute break every 2 hours. You have to do that. But if that means you might have to take a 15-minute break, 1 kilometer down the road from home, then people typically speed to get there quicker, so they don't have to do that. So again, we've got to be really careful with these consequences that the real world applies to the written policies that we have. If we're looking at putting leniency into policy, a good rule of thumb is, are we doing it because it makes commercial life easier or more possible, or are we doing it to increase safety? And I would suggest that the only reason we should allow leniency in policy that was written into the policy is where it actually adds to safety. We're doing it for a reason because we want people to be safer. So that's just a thought on policy. Okay, so we've talked about policy and the controls we have available there. What I want to do now is and we had to deal with that because it is an important part of the mix. What I want to do now is turn our focus onto the driver, which is where we at Fleet Coach specialise, because that's where the most control happens. So if you remember when you learned to drive, if you're like me, you're probably first time you got behind a wheel was maybe on the farm, or it might have been in a car park late at night, with your dad there telling you what to do. And that's all about how do I control the machine. It's about steering, braking, acceleration, and it's really nerve-wracking. But after 2 or 3 of those sessions, you're okay. I remember when I was teaching my lad to drive, he's 19 now, he started on the manual, and the number of squeal tires and stalls and all this sort of stuff we had was around that phase. Once you kind of learn to control the vehicle and you can start and stop it, you can control its speed, you know how to steer it properly, then we go into your typical learner driver space, which is around traffic mastery, road rules, stop lights, following distances, all these sorts of things make you a compliant user of the roads, and you're not introducing surprises to anybody else. And that's good as well. That's really important. I'm not dissing either of these two. What I'm about to say is that they're only a small part. They're about compliance and doing what is expected of you. But we're talking here about safety and being more aware of what's around you. So to be a really safe driver, or just to be a safe driver, I think, we need these higher order critical skills. And we need in real time to be able to assess risk. So what's going on around us? Is the traffic particularly congested? Is it raining? Are the roads wet? Is there sunstrike? We need to do self-evaluation. Am I tired? Am I stressed? Am I daydreaming? Am I distracted? All these sorts of things. Have I got an upset stomach? That's going to distract me from thinking well. And hazard perception. Hazard perception is a bit like risk assessment. It's basically being aware of everything that's around you in the impactful space. It might be a 200-meter window ahead of you, and just knowing what is going on, where are all the people, where are all the cars, what the other cars doing, being able to see the other drivers as they're about to turn. Have they eyeballed you? Have they seen you yet? And it's this golden part of the triangle that not only makes us safer drivers, but it makes us much more alert to the dangers around us from other people's bad driving. And if we can practice this sort of driving, then we, I'll share some stats in a minute, then we really do make massive headway into not just harming ourselves or damaging the vehicles or increasing the cost of vehicles, but also harming other people too. So it's this whole triangle that's necessary. And I'll just maybe ask people to think, when was the last time you considered your state of mind when you got into a vehicle? Or you were active in perceiving hazards or doing risk assessment? Probably not that frequently, I would suggest. Okay, telematics. The problem with self-evaluation and understanding what's going on inside your head is it's really hard to see. It's really hard to see for ourselves sometimes, especially if you're stressed, and we'll get onto this in a minute. But also, it's even harder to see with your staff who might be out on the road for a day or so driving, or just for the afternoon. And we just don't know what's going on in their heads, and therefore we don't know what that upper quadrant of safe driving is doing for them. We can get some decent clues into though through the telematics, and I'm glad SmartTrack was here today as well, because Aaron kind of led me nicely into this. Thank you, Aaron. If we're seeing harsh braking and we're speeding and some nasty cornering, as well as some policy breaches, and it all comes through the telematics, then we can start to infer what's going on, the root causes of that behavior. Excuse me. If we're seeing harsh braking, harsh acceleration, then we're talking about an impetuous driver, maybe an anxious driver. If we're seeing, gentle acceleration but harsh braking, then it could be fatigue. And these sorts of patterns build up over time. And as an organization with the SmartTrack sort of system, then you're able to notice trends like, hang on, everybody seems to be driving in a fatigued way about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or they're in a rush first thing in the morning. And that enables you to begin to address these things. So people sometimes say, I know it's training or it's telematics, which do I do, or I want to do this first? And like Aaron said, they work hand in glove. Because then once we can improve the state of mind, then that shows up in the telematics too. And it's this really positive system where people become better drivers and happier drivers and calmer drivers. Okay, so here's some of the problems we have with modern drivers. Maybe you can identify with some of these. If you do a bad behavior, and let's say it's checking a text, I'm sure no one here ever checks a text on their phone. If you check a text and you get away with it, you think, oh, that's safe. Or if you speed a little bit and there's no negative consequence, you may not consciously go, oh, that's fine, I'll keep doing that. But your own psychology will just build that into your worldview. And before you know it, that becomes your new normal. You start to think that you're more skilled than other people, because you know that checking texts while you're driving is the wrong thing, and people have crashes, but it hasn't happened to you. So therefore, you must be better than everyone else. There's the classic optimism bias. It will never happen to me. Or the belief that the technology will save you. And you can be in a really safe vehicle. But if you're doing 100 k's an hour and you're checking your text and you run into the back of someone, the result's pretty much the same. Stress is another factor we talk about quite a bit. And I just want people to have a think for a minute about what they're like when they're stressed in any situation. Just we'll just take 5 seconds for you to have a think about that. What's your mindset like? You usually find you become quite snappy. You look for very specific signals. You become very narrow-minded, and you become absolutely confident that you're right, which is why we wind up arguing and and being tunnel visioned. When we're relaxed and we're calm, the opposite happens. We notice around us. When we're on holiday, you notice the blue sky and the sea and the taste of the wine and all that sort of stuff. And that's because we're relaxed and we're calm. So it's really important when people are driving that they aren't under stress. And that stress can come from a schedule that's too tight, from a boss that's just yelled at them, from all sorts of ways. But people need to be able to check in with themselves before they turn the ignition on and kind of go, right, am I stressed? If I am, let's just put that aside until I get out of the car, and drive calmly. Okay, so how do we achieve this? How do we help people change from being kind of these functional, stressed, overconfident drivers into self-aware drivers? So we, first of all, I don't think we should ever do it in a punitive way. Organizations that say we want to pick the 10 worst drivers and we're going to do this with their vehicle and we want to put them on this course, etc., is wrong, because it just drives people further down. If instead we can give people the opportunity to improve, to get some evaluation on themselves that's objective, to undergo some training and some coaching, and then reflect on that, then the results are hugely different. People are less resistant. They go through much less of a tick in the box sort of exercise. And not only become better drivers, but they become more pleasant in the office or around work and maybe at home too. So coaching is the key. It's not lecturing, it's not telling, it's not punishing. It's getting alongside people and just helping them to lift themselves up. Okay, a couple of brief stories. So we work with Fletcher Building. They didn't make training compulsory, but they opted it to everyone, and it started a language change. So rather than talk about compliance and not crashing, they focused on hazard perception. Let's all talk about just spotting hazards. They had a 60% reduction in overspeeding and a 30 to 40% estimated reduction in at-fault injuries. So these are really meaningful numbers for a large fleet. And they've got all sorts of drivers, but they work in construction. So these are very pragmatic, practical people, and they've gone on board simply because they're allowed and encouraged to be better drivers rather than told they're in trouble if they weren't. The second one, Department of Conservation here in New Zealand. We trained 2,000 of their drivers in 6 months alongside vehicle tracking. Interestingly for them, their leadership did it first, and this is a key component. People will follow where the leaders lead, and leaders lead by what they do, not necessarily just by the emails they send. So Department of Conservation were great. They completely wiped serious injuries while driving, a 75% reduction in kilometers travelled over the speed limit, and a 60% increase in near miss reporting. Those are great figures, and fair credit to them. That 60% increase in near miss reporting may sound like things were getting more dangerous, but it's not. People were actually spotting hazards and reporting them, and they felt it was okay to report that they nearly hit a pole or they nearly went through a red light because of the culture of the organisation had changed. So I know that's been a bit of a fast blast through all of that. So I wanted, like Aaron did, I wanted to leave you with a few key ingredients about what makes this right. So first of all, get the policy right, just to provide good constraints that are loose enough to allow people to be more safe. Focus on hazard perception as a cultural theme. This is about us all spotting danger together, whether we're alone in a vehicle or with other people. Coach, don't punish. No one likes to be punished. No one likes to be told what to do and have the finger pointed at them. They like to be supported. And leadership have to get involved. They have to do it. They have to be maybe a bit vulnerable in public with their results and their driving behaviour, so that people can see this is a thing that's important to the organisation. So yeah, I hope that's been useful. I look forward to hearing any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That was a great presentation as well, and some really useful tips there for everybody. I'll just get Aaron to join us again as well, because we have a bit of time for Q&A now as well. So I think I've seen a couple of questions come through already, but really liked a couple of your points there, Richard, around the seeing training, like other training, I suppose, in the workplace, driver training is continuous professional development for everybody as well, similar to other workplace training, which is great. And also what you were saying about hazard perception. And I've had some recent conversations with people. They said, how many, have you ever driven home from work, for example, or from picking the kids up and got home and actually not remembered how you got there and the journey that you got to go home, because it's that routine route that you've taken, that to get home, and that you've not. So have you missed hazards on the way because you've not remembered that route home that you've driven so often? So some really interesting points. Thank you. We've got Aaron back as well. Thanks, Aaron. So if you do have a question for either of our speakers, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box as well. But I have got a couple through already. So one for you, Aaron, what you were saying around idling. That there's a question here about, does putting the car in neutral use less fuel or power if it's an electric vehicle than leaving it in drive with your foot on the brake?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. The intuition behind the question is right. In older carbureted cars, neutral generally did save fuel at lights, but fuel injection technology kind of changed that. The car is essentially already in neutral from a fuel perspective when you have stopped it in drive. The transmission is engaged, but no significant fuel is being burned to keep it that way. So no, you don't. With electric, well, this is kind of easier to answer because EVs use no energy idling, full stop. Whether you're in drive or neutral, with your foot on the brake at stop, the motor isn't running because there's nothing to keep running. That's actually one of the major efficiency advantages of EVs over petrol.
Great, thanks for that, Aaron, as well. And I've got another question here too, which is around PCBUs. So if a PCBU doesn't have a fleet management system to produce the data, when we've been talking about that, do they face a greater challenge in terms of prosecution if a fatality or injury occurred and there was a prosecution at?
Yeah, a great question as well, but I want to be upfront. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give you a definitive legal answer. But based on HISWA, or the way HISWA is written and the way WorkSafe approaches investigations, I can kind of share this how this generally plays out. The test under HISWA isn't did you have a fleet management system. The test is, did you take reasonable, practicable steps to manage the risk? A fleet management system is one way to do that, but it's not the only way. Smaller organizations might rely on paper logs, regular vehicle checks, written journey plans, for example, indirect supervision. Those can all count as reasonable steps. Where a PCBU could face a tougher position is if they had no system of any kind of management, managing fleet risk. WorkSafe would likely ask, how did you know your drivers weren't fatigued? How did you know your vehicles were maintained? How did you ensure speed policy was being followed? So if the answer to all those is we didn't really track it, that's a much harder argument to defend than we had systems in place and here's what it showed. The other thing we're saying as well is the size and nature of your operation matters. WorkSafe applies the reasonably practicable, I always trip up on the word, so I'm trying to say it properly, test in context. A 10-vehicle community service fleet isn't expected to have the same system as a 200-vehicle commercial transport operation, for example. Every PCBU is expected to have something proportionate to their risk. So I hope that answers, but again, I'm not a lawyer, so please, yeah, keep that in mind.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, that is really helpful, I think. But if anyone does have follow-up questions to that or did want a legal input on it, we do have a couple of contacts with lawyers who specialise in that space. So you can always drop us an email at Break and we can do our best to put you in contact with that. Although obviously if your organisation would likely have their own lawyers as well that you can ask those sorts of questions to if you need to around your own systems that you've got in place as well. Which actually what you were saying, Aaron, though, about different things being in place for the different size of company you've got as well. One of the questions for both you and for Richard is around what are the key things to, if you're just starting out, what should you focus on? And particularly if you're perhaps a smaller organisation that has a limited budget, things like that, what are some of the key things you can look at to start with? So if I come to you first, Richard, maybe for a change.
I think so if you've got a really limited budget, but you've still got the risk, I would. I want to sound biased here, obviously, but I would engage in some sort of hazard perception training. It can be very inexpensive, but the reason I suggest that is because that immediately changes the behaviour of the driver and is control for the risk, and is quick to implement. Typically, it's quick to implement. I'm imagining here maybe like a 3-vehicle small building company or a small plumbing company, something of that ilk. So I would go with training. But like I said, and I think Aaron might mention this as well, is leadership is the key. And when your staff, your crews see you paying attention to it, they'll start paying attention to it, and calling it out. Hey, that was, you've got to be at the next place in half an hour. It's a 45-minute drive. Don't worry, I'll phone up the customer. I'll have the argument with them, tell them you're going to be late. Just be practical. Train and be practical.
I'll just I agree with everything Richard said there, and I think if you're a smaller organization, start with the basics, a written driver safety policy, a way to know where your people are, a process for incident response. Like, that's a strong foundation, and you can build off that. Work with people who know in the industry as well, and feel free to reach out to the likes of companies like SmartTrack, Brake and the likes. Just this is kind of our wheelhouse, so we're always happy to consult on those things.
Thanks, Aaron. And there are some things like online templates, things that you can use for things like safe driving policy and safe driver agreement as well. So I would encourage people to have a look at those, but do make sure that they are from reputable places. But there are certainly some that have been produced and are available, which can help you if you've not sure where to start from, can help you to build one of those up. But if you want some links to those, again, we can provide things like that too if you get in contact with us. So that's great. I think I haven't seen any other questions come through, so it's looking like yes, Richard.
Can I ask Aaron a question?
Absolutely.
It's just to break the rules a bit. I was one thing that surprised me and made my kind of ears stand on end during your presentation, Andrew, was around the multiplier factor when you had that fleet of, I think, 130 plus vehicles, and they're doing 10,000 kilometers a day. That's kind of what I drive in a year, and it just struck me as like, there's a real multiplier for large fleets of the risk. Instead of it being once every 2 or 3 years you have a significant accident, it kind of could be daily. So I think we've talked about small fleets, but I think as we look at the big fleets as well, it just ramps it up, and like you mentioned, those direct penalties and the jail time and the fines plus the ripple effects. Large fleets, you must have a lot of concerned large fleet managers that come and speak to you.
Well, it was really surprising while I was doing some research around this, and 1 in 5 vehicles from a fleet are in an accident per year, and I just thought, that's quite high. It was really interesting, and I can imagine when you've got a larger fleet, having all that information at your fingertips is really important, to have that visibility again. Visibility and training, it kept coming back to that.
Nice.
Great. Thanks to both of you. Really appreciate your time. Thank you to those who submitted questions through as well. That was great. And if you think of a question following this that you really want to pose to Richard or Aaron, then feel free to get in touch with us. The slides will be going out following the webinar as well, so you'll have those to refer back to, but we can also put you in contact as well if you have individual questions that you think of that you'd like answered. Thanks for that. So just to finish off, I'm going to share a couple of forthcoming initiatives that we have happening through break as well. So we have got a number of fleet events booked in for the rest of this year, and there will be some more likely coming online in the next few months as well. So that includes a breakfast event for those of you who are involved in government departments, councils, those sorts of things. We will be holding one of those in Wellington, sponsored by SmarTrack in June. And we've got also we're working again with the Australasian Fleet Management Association on some fleet seminars around New Zealand as well later in the year. So details of those will be online soon for you too. I also mentioned at the start that we coordinate National Road Safety Week in New Zealand, and that takes place each May. In fact, it's next week, so it's coming up very quickly. However, it's not too late to get involved. So there are some really easy ways to take part and share road safety messages in your internal comms on social media, or help to raise awareness of key road safety issues with your drivers and staff. So if you want to get involved, you can go to the Road Safety Week website and sign up. It's got the theme Be a Road Safety Hero, so we are celebrating all different types of road safety heroes throughout the week. So feel free to go to the website and sign up for your free resources if you'd like to take part. The resources are also not date specific, so you can use them at any time during the year, not just during Road Safety Week. And if you're in Australia, the Australian week is still a couple of weeks away, so that takes place this year, the 17th to the 23rd of May. And as mentioned earlier, we are a charity, and thank you to Richard for his plug of us as well and support for us. So as a charity, we rely on donations, fundraisers and corporate supporters to help us to continue our work. So if you are able to help us in some way, it's greatly appreciated. You can support us through an entertainment membership or buying a good gift card, which work in the same way as normal gift cards, except your recipient can donate to a charity of their choice that's registered on the Good Registry, and we are one of those charities. You could become a partner or a donor if you're interested in being joining us with corporate partnership or sponsorship, or if you're able to make an individual donation or fundraise for us in your organisation, then it's very much appreciated. And if you'd like to know more, feel free to get in contact with me. So I hope you found today's webinar useful and interesting. Thank you again to both of our speakers, Aaron and Richard, to our sponsors, SmarTrack, and to all of you for joining us today. And we hope to see you at another event again soon.